Welcome to this podcast episode titled Sociology in the Philippines. This episode is part of a series of podcasts organized by the International Sociological Association and national associations like the Philippine Sociological Society. This series aims to use modern platforms to share our work with a broader audience, including prospective students, the general public, and scholars interested in learning about sociologies in other countries. I am Athena Shireen, Presto or Ash Presto, your host for this episode. We are very pleased to have Professor Maria Cynthia Rose Banzon Bautista as our guest for this episode. Dr. Banzon Bautista was professor of sociology at the University of the Philippines. She earned her PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and has extensively researched topics such as poverty, agrarian issues, and the socio-political dynamics of the Philippines, particularly the impacts of natural disasters like Mount Pinatubo. Her scholarly contributions have earned her prestigious awards, including the Outstanding Young Scientist of the Philippines and the 10 Outstanding Women in the Nation's Service. Dr. Banzon Bautista has held numerous leadership roles, including Commissioner at the Commission on Higher Education, Vice President for Academic Affairs of the University of the Philippines System, Dean of the College of Social Sciences and Philosophy of the University of the Philippines Diliman, Executive Director of the Center for Integrative and Development Studies, and Chair of the Philippine Social Science Council. She has helped shape educational policies and social science development locally and internationally through her contributions to international advisory boards and foundations. Good morning, magandang umaga po, Professor Ma'am
Morning,
Sinch.
Ash. Morning.
Kamusta po kayo, Ma'am
I'm
Sinch?
fine. I'm fine. Thank you.
Salamat po sa pagpapaunlak sa interview. Thank you so much for agreeing to our invitation. So without further ado, Ma'am Sinch, I will ask my first question to you.
Yeah.
Has the practice of sociology changed over the decades?
So I guess I can answer that by looking at my own experience from the time I was a student of sociology to the present. So I was a student of sociology in the 1970s. And at that time, sociology, I'm from the Department of Sociology of the University of the Philippines, which at that time had one of the biggest sociology departments. And at that time, I think the Philippines being influenced or colonized by the United States, sociology was also very much influenced by American sociology because the early sociologists in the country in our department were Americans who actually helped develop the department. But there was a time I was told that the sociology in the United States wanted to be a member of the National Academy of Science and Technology. And for them to be accepted as a member, they had to actually show that they take on a positivist scientific framework. And so positivism was the dominant tradition at the time, but we were the ones doing a lot of the population studies. The 70s was also the time when funding agencies came to the Philippines because of the limits to growth model, which actually was saying that the increasing population is not necessarily good for the country. So population control, the study of demography was paramount at that time. And I think that was also the time when the graduates of my department, this was the graduates of the 60s and the 70s, they were working closely even with other departments, like with Ateneo, in the population studies. So that was a period of positivism. We were all schooled in a lot of the positivist perspectives. The University of the Philippines in particular was more American, even in its philosophy, so that our philosophy for our sociology curriculum consisted of logic and the philosophy of knowledge and the philosophy of science. So that was a period in the development of many of the sociologists of my generation. But then sometime towards the towards the mid 70s, I think there was a critique in American sociology. I remember the book of Alvin Goldner on the crisis of sociology. And that was a time when there was a critique of positivism as the mainframe of sociology. At that time, one of our professors, Professor Randy David, actually came back from, and Professor Karina David, they came back from England, and the perspective was very different. A critique even of the questions that are in the questionnaire. So it made us, or at least when they came in, and they were also our professors, and I happened to be a research associate of both, or research assistant of both the positivist Dr. Bulatao and Professor David. The Professor David brought in the critique of positivism in actual research. So the participant why the qualitative methods in sociology were very important. So that was the beginning of the, in a sense, not the crack, but the beginning of the openness of sociology to more qualitative methods. And then it overlaid over that, you had the development theories, when people were now looking at the sociology of development and the sociology of underdevelopment and the theories of development and underdevelopment, that the Latin American theories, and all that, down to the Marxist perspectives. So in a way, because I was working with two very different perspectives in sociology, but this is just urban sociology, and this is just all of the discourses at the level of theories and perspectives. In a sense, there was also an implicit critique of positivism. So at the level of such theories and meta theories, that was that period. But there was a period of rapprochement, of coming together, when people were trying to bring together different perspectives. For instance, structuration, you have action and structure. When even some of the Marxists were trying to bring together, the more structuralist Marxists were seeing positivism as okay, but that it explains only the level of reality of what exists, but it doesn't really understand why that situation exists. So that's at the level of discourse. In the 80s, you have more action, participatory research, and the sociologists were also at the forefront of participatory research. In fact, we were trying to also figure out where participatory research falls within the different practices. So it
Mhm.
became more in the 70s and early 70s, it was more, there was a hegemonic paradigm, which was positivism on one hand, but on the other hand, sociology that was very general, that wasn't really in line with positivism and statistics. Towards the 1980s, it became more diverse,
Mm.
but in the late 70s, more contending with each other. But with our engagement in development and underdevelopment, and especially with issues like poverty and inequality, then you actually had a lot of those engaged in participatory research. The belief that you have to bring in the people and they have to be involved and engaged, because you cannot really understand from outside. And this is also the coming together of the more subjective understandings and interpretations that have to be taken into account when you account for reality. The objective reality actually has to take into account subjective interpretations of that reality. It became more diverse. Perspectives also changed, okay? So from a very objective reality with certain standards of truth, then you had the postmodern period. In postmodernism, it was a critique of standards, a
Mhm.
critique of methods. It was a privileging of the truth, of the personal truth, a privileging of subjectivity, a privileging of interpretations. Sociology was at the forefront of the reality of multiple realities, and sociologists have been respectful of multiple realities. So that's still, I think, part of sociology. Uh, but I think our sociology seems to connect or combine. uh,
Mhm.
n- those are all frames. No one is exactly in one frame. It's very difficult to say. We don't really have people who staunchly fight for one school of thought, and that school of thought is the school of thought. We actually they actually say they take this perspective, but sociologists in the Philippines have greater respect for other disciplines. And then my own dilemma as I grew older and I started working with different research groups that are not necessarily groups of sociologists. There are also attempts in sociology to actually develop a Filipino sociology, to understand Filipinos also from the perspective using within their language and within the culture of the country. It may not have it may not have as deep roots in sociology as it had in psychology and anthropology and in history to a certain extent. But for reasons, I think there are a lot of barriers. One barrier would be this whole engagement with a lot of theoretical perspectives that actually might have constrained the further development of the discipline. I guess the not being able to move into to use our language, for instance, as a country, our language as a people, in the way we think about the world. So we were still thinking about the world in English most of the time, and with perspectives that are generally more Western.
The next question, Ma'am Sinch, would be now, um, in the Philippines, we see that different topics are gaining increased interest from sociologists. So these include gender, migration, the environment, or urbanization, even democracy. So, in amid all of these increased interests, how do you see the role of sociology to engage current issues and realities?
Sociology has been engaging, at least as from my observation, sociology has been engaging in all sorts of issues even early on. Diba?
Mhm.
Even of course we were at that time, even when positivism was at its height and many people were engaged in population studies, we had sociologists who were doing a lot of community understanding communities, understanding cultures of communities. We had sociologists, but maybe people were engaged in many more issues when development became the frame, when it was the development of the country, and when the historical developments also of the country politically. For instance, democracy. I remember that right after the People Power 1986 People Power uprising about more than 3 decades ago, 39 years ago, the question then was, how do you now consolidate democracy? The democratization process became a topic for many sociologists. And then how to actually consolidate it also became an issue or a topic that people were concerned with, to the point that some of our political science friends were saying why sociologists are going into the turf of political science or the turf even of other disciplines. And our response is, it's very hard to confine sociology because sociology is society and culture. And when you talk society, you talk about the different aspects of life, and politics is very much a part of it. And political sociology has also been a perspective in political science in the Philippines, for instance, has been a perspective in political science that actually made them look more at dynamics, perhaps, than at certain things. So in other words, even early on, sociologists were engaged in different issues of poverty that actually affected the country. But they became engaged in specific issues as history unfolded. For instance, migration was not of such interest in the past. It was What was interesting was in and out migration to Metro Manila, diba? And the urbanization of Metro Manila because of that. But international migration became an issue after we made it an implicit labor export policy of the country to actually send people out to the Gulf area, originally to the Gulf area. So we were even involved in a migration study in Asia because we were sending Filipinos to different parts of the world. But Filipinos are already migrating even early on to the US. But that became an interesting study for more people because it was international because of our international migration policy. Urbanization, because of the problems of urbanization and the rapid expansion. So people also engage in urbanization and urban studies. And many of those who engage in urban studies are also engaged in participatory studies, participatory action research, because the question then was we just don't stop at trying to understand and analyze. We also have to help provide certain solutions or suggest certain solutions. And sometimes also we get engaged in the actual by participating in the actual issues that we were engaged in. It's part of a developmental perspective that you also act. You're not just a theorist or you're not just an analyst, but you're also engaged in action. Gender, I guess, became so interestingly, gender was not a crime. Sexual harassment was not a crime in the past because it was you had sexual harassment definitely in the past, but with more awareness about gender issues, issues of women, then it led to certain perspectives and certain policies that makes it now criminal because it's against the law to actually engage in certain things. Then you have gender differences, which I think sociologists are more attuned to than maybe some other social scientists, and that may account for the interest in gender studies beyond women's studies. But in the late 70s and 80s, apart from population, women's studies was the other thing. Because that was when the United Nations was actually starting to assert the need to actually focus on women and the discrimination of women and the harassment of women and all that. So the status, yeah, my first project after population with the former department chair, Professor Ang Angko, was the status of women in the Philippines. And many sociologists also did look at the status, many Filipino sociologists did look at the status of women. So what I can say is that sociologists are almost engaged in anything that any of the issues confronting the country. Uh, yeah, so gender, urbanization, migration, environment. I guess, one of I remember one of our foremost sociologists, Helia Castillo, was actually arguing, oh, this was in the 80s and 90s. Her argument is we have to solve concrete problems, as a concrete problems of the environment. We cannot solve that alone. So this was a plea in sociology for sociologists to be engaged in multidisciplinary research together with natural scientists and together with not just social scientists but also with natural science to cross disciplines,
Mhm.
which is why it has become very difficult for me to delimit the discipline and say this is what sociology does. Because eventually, as you learn from engagements with other scientists, then what you learn from there become part of your framing of the problem, and your sociology becomes broader than the usual look at just the society and the culture, the structure and organization.
Thank you, Ma'am Sinch. Those were very encouraging. My main takeaway would be that Philippine sociology has always been first engaged and second interdisciplinary. And the way that Philippine sociology is engaged and interdisciplinary responds to both contemporary challenges and shifts in international discourse as well. But of course, being engaged and interdisciplinary is easier said than done. I'm sure that in the past, several challenges have also confronted sociologists. And what do you think these challenges were, and how have they continued up until the contemporary period?
challenge of sociology as sociology is really, first of all, the challenge of defining what it is, defining
Mhm.
what is disciplinary and what we are bringing into the discipline. In other
Mhm.
words, the discipline actually gives us concepts, gives us frames, which we use in the beginning. But as we engage in the research, I mean, many of us will realize as you engage in the research, you actually look at things that are not always looked at
Mhm.
from the perspective of sociology and its theories and its concepts and its perspectives. So that challenge, but it may not be a challenge at all if you just do. I mean, you just do the work and you just come out with the research and then share whatever that research is. Okay. But the challenge is the sharing. Okay, I guess the community of sociologists, we are not necessarily as exposed to each other's work, except to those who are working within the same area. So maybe one of the challenges is the need to actually understand what sociologists are actually doing and what they're actually finding out and what they're actually sharing. I don't know if departments actually provide discussions where the sociologists are able to share their work, and also the usual brown bags that happen when you're in graduate school, when you're already professional sociologists in communities. Your community is the community you're working on a project with. It may not necessarily be the community of other sociologists who might enrich your work with other insights. So that's a challenge internal to the discipline and to projects of people. The challenge of working with others is that, I mean, my challenge has always been, I mean, I engage, I contribute. If you're doing research with natural scientists, you're always a second class citizen because it's not always from that perspective. Usually they see the sociologists and other social scientists coming in to help understand how their technology or how their findings can be accepted or understood by the public. So it is just the communication. We have not yet reached a point or even where the social scientists and sociologists might help with the framing of the study itself. We help with context, more with context than so we're more peripheral to research that is actually done with other social scientists. But I guess some of our colleagues, I mean, I think of my colleague Emma Porio in Ateneo, who's doing a lot of work on the climate change and is doing a lot of excellent work contributing to the way to look at things and the way to actually study climate change as it affects different kinds of communities. So that's the challenge at that level. I'll talk about the strength first before that's challenge. I guess the strength of sociologists is precisely being able to look to know where people when people argue, to know where they're coming from, because the sociologist is trained, or at least is supposed to be trained in looking at different perspectives and understanding the perspectives in terms of assumptions. So you know what assumptions people are standing on, even if they may not be aware of such assumptions. Okay. So it is easier to place them, it's easier to respect the different positions, but it's also easier to debate if you are taking on a different perspective. And one of the big challenges for a sociologist, and for me in particular, is if you respect different, it was easier in the past to talk about this is the fact. And you're not any interpretation that is against the fact and against truth. Because there are standards of facts and truths. But and that for a while, because sociology is a science, in a sense, social science, sociology has had certain norms. But when you have perspectives that actually give voice to different people, but at the same time can actually provide the privilege, the truths of everyone, and everyone's truths may actually be part of the lie, then how do you deal with that ethically? I mean, perspective wise, I'll go by facts. But I also understand where those who don't go by facts what where they're coming from. But the problem is we have a society. The world right now is a world of lies, where the rationality, the values of rationality, the values of the values of the enlightenment, of rationality, of truth, which is the basis of science and the basis of facts, they're eroding very fast.
Mhm.
So how does the sociologist ethically figure come in here? Uh, while respecting and understanding the truths that people actually believe in because of the conditions they are in, but at the same time there are facts that actually are there, that are undeniable facts. So 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 that to me is a challenge that I did not think of before all of these global developments on the shift to authoritarianism globally, but not hopefully that not in the Philippines, not yet in the Philippines, hopefully not. AI, of course, is very far from our people who do not have access even to internet. But the AI world and the digital world and the world that it is creating is a different world. And yeah, so even the sociology, we used to have sociology of mass communications. And in the sociology of mass communications, we were just taught, it was really mass communications on one hand as that can be very populist. So it's just going to reflect what the people want, and therefore that's not what you want. But at the same time, want to have mass communications that also reflect certain values and certain norms that are not necessarily with the people. But that was sociology of mass communications at the time when you just had broadcast communications. But what is the sociology of social media, the sociology of communications in a world, in a digital world? So I'm glad there are young faculty members or young sociologists who are interested in understanding the digital world and maybe understanding communications in the digital world. So that's the new thing that reflects the evolution of Philippine society, or the evolution of global society.
And now we end with one very simple question for you, Ma'am Sinch. That question would be, how would you describe Philippine sociology?
First, Philippine sociology is what sociologists in the Filipino sociologists are actually engaged in. So for me, Philippine sociology is what Filipino sociologists do. But at the same time, I guess you also need people who will reflect on this, on what constitutes Philippines, what is Philippine sociology, what is it like? Ah, how Western is it? How colonial are its categories? Has it actually adapted or at least used concepts and sociological perspectives in understanding problems without being tied up to these perspectives, and in the course of doing the field research or the grounded research, get to understand certain concepts that they would not have thought of before, that would contribute to understanding Philippine realities. I think we need people who will also be more reflective about what Philippine sociology is. I'm explaining to you what I think Philippine sociology is, but it is not nuanced enough, and the nuancing is dependent on the reflection that the people give to what the sociologists do or what they actually produce. I must say sociologists have been very dynamic, have had tremendous impact as individuals and maybe as groups of individuals. Is there impact because of their sociology? Is there impact because of other things? But I must say sociology is part of that impact. But the way of managing and the way of understanding the issues is actually influenced a lot by the discipline, by the way the discipline looks at things. So if they have an impact, It's the impact of their work, yes, when they were young, when they're no longer in just doing academic work. It's the impact of their other work, but the perspective of sociology and the sociological imagination has always been there to actually help unpack certain things. So for me, sociology is a tool. It's a tool to unpack, to understand what goes on, because it provides you different perspectives and ways of understanding that you can apply to a concrete situation. So I am very proud to be a sociologist. I guess I must say, that one of the challenges of sociology is that you don't attract students the way other disciplines attract students. We don't have law that political science has, so therefore they attract a lot of students, or medicine that psychology actually has after, for those who want to go into medicine. We don't have that. And most of the time, the students who come to sociology, it's not their first choice. Sometimes they're just there because they have no other choice. But it always shapes them and helps them. I guess helps them see things, and then get to love the discipline. Okay, my generation got into sociology partly because of the activism, the student activism of those days, and therefore sociology was a better choice for many of us. And the impact of people wherever they are is the impact not cannot be attributed solely to sociology, of course, but sociology is so ingrained in the way we think that I think you cannot dissociate yourself from it. So that's my way of looking, I mean, my feeling about sociology on hindsight after being away from pure sociological work.
Yes. So, Philippine sociology is what Filipino sociologists do, and what they do is dynamic, engaged, and reflexive. And for that,
And we
I
need to reflect, but at the same time, even if it's dynamic, engaged, and reflexive, we still need a group of them, to a group of sociologists to actually think this more through. In other words, what is it? What is it that feel, apart from what they do, what is it that we call Philippine sociology?
sociology is also ever introspective, and metacritical. And for that, we are very proud to call ourselves Filipino sociologists. Thank you so much, Ma'am Cinch, for your contributions and insights. Thank you so much to the International Sociological Association and the Philippine Sociological Society for organizing this podcast. And we look forward to engaging with you in other episodes.